Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 485. This program is dedicated by Paula and Jonathan Weiss in honor of their wedding anniversary to many more years of health and happiness. We've entered into the joyous month of Adar Rishon, the first of two Adars, this year being a leap year. And as the Talmud tells us, Mishanichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. As we enter into the month of Adar, we increase in joy. So in this case, we have 2 months of Adar, which is double amount of joy, and according to the rule of Mailam B'Kedesh, that we always have to ascend in all matters of goodness and holiness and Kedusha, that we increase every day more joy. We know we're living in difficult times. There's a war going on in Israel. Lives have been lost. Atrocities have been perpetrated. There are many things that can give us cause for not having so much joy, actually being sad. And yet we're still told Marbim B'Simcha. As we discussed in previous programs, because Simcha doesn't mean frivolous joy. It doesn't mean a joy of denial, of escapism. Joy of knowing that we're here fulfilling God's purpose in the world. Sometimes that purpose is in a revealed way positive, sometimes it goes through challenges. But the joy is always necessary. So even when you're fighting a battle, there's also an element of joy, of positivity, of confidence, of hope, knowing that you're fighting the right cause, knowing that you will prevail. So all that increases in joy. As a matter of fact, you need joy even more in difficult times than in easy times, so to speak, because it gives us strength. The opposite would be demoralizing, would be weakening. And we know we go with the hand of God, we know we go with the strength of Hashem, and we can get through everything, as Jews have demonstrated throughout history, that we will prevail. Obviously, we pray and we hope that it should be with the least amount of pain, with the least amount of suffering, with the least amount of loss. But we will prevail. We are fighting a war that firstly protects innocent men, women, and children against enemies that have demonstrated themselves as being worse than savages. Secondly, this is Eretz Yisrael, land, the promised land that Hashem watches over, in addition to Hina Le'yonim V'Le'yishan Shem Yisrael everywhere, where God the protector of Israel never sleeps and never slumbers, especially in Eretz Yisrael. So there's both a bracha that on this program and all our prayers and our studies and our additional tzedakah, all the 3 pillars upon which the world stands, should help the spiritual side of the war. That helps the physical side, but also to know that we have absolute confidence that we shall prevail. We just have to do what we have to do and not feel that we have to respond to the pressures of others, whether it's their anti-Semitic feelings or in general their own diplomatic and political agendas. This is a clearly defensive war, and just on a very basic level, I think it's all of us should understand something that is so, to me at least, is so crystal clear. I talk about, we all cry for any human being lost, whether Jew or not Jew, anyone being killed in a war. But there are ways that ceasefires are implemented. You want a ceasefire? Very straightforward. Let's just follow the rule of history. Ceasefire is when the enemy who's attacked you surrenders unconditionally, completely, returns all the hostages, eliminates from their constitution and from their words the call for the annihilation and destruction of Jews in Israel, and proves it in actions. That's it, you get a ceasefire. It's so ludicrous, insanity, to even be talking no ceasefire because there's human beings being killed, civilians. You want to stop those civilians being killed? Very simple, surrender. Why is there no such call? For the life of me, I cannot understand. The focus is completely in a distorted way. During World War II, the war ends by the enemy unconditionally surrendering. You don't say because civilians are being killed in Germany and Japan, that's why let's have a ceasefire. They're being killed because you declared war against Israel, And you not only declared, you behaved in ways that are not just war, completely inhumanity, the atrocities perpetrated, the brutality, etc. So there's one way to end the war. That should be the only focus and the only headline. I'm saying it because it's so infuriating. We are in Chassidus applied, but Chassidus applied means applying Torah clarity and Chassidus clarity to life. And this is a life situation. So I felt I should just open up with this very straightforward way to end this war very quickly. Just as it began, you reverse the whole process. Whatever you did, we're not even getting to paying your dues for what you perpetrated on what is called October 7th now, Shemini Atzeres, Simchas Torah. But we're talking about ending it now. Total unconditional surrender, return of the hostages, eliminating any call for war. Stop declaring war in Israel. Simple as that. All of us, anyone with Meir Kahana, as they say, with a brain in their head, half a brain in their head, should declare this very clearly, and everything else is secondary, not even secondary. Even if there were the claim that there's a cause that's being represented and Israel has oppressed Palestinians, fine, so sit down and talk about it. There are ways to deal with it. But we're talking about ending a war right now. Okay. So that's just an opening statement all the time, especially, as I said, in the month of Adar, we go with a full fortitude and confidence and strength, with the inner joy. And joy in this case is the forging ahead with absolute hope, emunah, betachon, faith and trust in God, that we shall prevail, we will prevail, and all b'simcha v'tuv levav, b'teva nirav anigla, in a joyous way, in a revealed way. So this is a general lesson from this time, lessons from Adar. Being we have different elements in time, so what does this week's Torah portion and time period teach us today? So we started with the time period of Adar, but let's talk a little more details about Adar, lessons from Adar. Someone asked the question, what are some things that Rebbe did during Adar to increase in joy that we can emulate today? Very good question. I was thinking about actions. I mean, in words, when Adar would come, whether it was one Adar or a leap year, and Hashanah Mubarak, two others, this became a central focus. Mishenichnas Adar Marim B'Simcha, and the increase of joy. And Kudei Hashem Yisharim Mesamche Leiv starts with the joy that comes through Torah mitzvahs, but also simple joy like celebrating and dancing. That became the custom in 770 and in other places, that special dancing going on every day in the month of Adar, at the encouragement of the Rebbe. The Rebbe himself, as I said, encouraged it. I'm thinking if there are any specific things he said to do. I do remember when he spoke at the rallies for the children, he would obviously also encourage that everything be done with simcha, and there was clearly more simcha in the singing and the dancing. But I don't know if there was any particular campaigns of simcha, besides, of course, gathering, as I said, children together, b'chlal gathering together, gatherings which are always connected to simcha. But if there's something that somebody has in mind that you remember that Rebbe actually implemented in the month of Adar, I'd love to hear about it. Now, of course, there's the halachas, that if you're dealing with a court case, the month of Adar is an opportune time, an auspicious time for that. Mazole body mazle, the mazle vidin is a healthier, stronger in this month. For all the reasons, Purim, Haman, of course, made the mistake. He thought it was a bad month because it was the passing of Moshe in the month of Adar, in Zion Adar. Little did he know that was also his birth. But are there any specific things that the Rebbe implemented? Like we know, for example, in the 3 weeks that Rebbe implemented the learning of the laws of Beis HaMikdash, both in Teresh Biksav and Teresh Bapeh and Rambam, doing siyumim, and other things that the Rebbe implemented. If there's things specifically in the month of Adar, please, as partners, share with me, and I will share it with the public. Thank God we still have quite a few weeks in this first Adar, and then the second Adar, and increasing in joy. But definitely the emphasis on simcha and bringing out the inner simcha that is there within each of our souls, and demonstrating it in a revealed way, which is the whole nature of simcha, which is to express it. What is the significance of 60 days of Adar? So as I mentioned, it's double, kaflaim letishia. Double is not just in quantity, it's also quality. And you actually have 60 days to increase each day. Now we know that 60 days is a result of a Shana Muberes, a leap year, which is a result actually of a negative thing. The diminishment of the moon, which caused a discrepancy between the lunar calendar and the solar calendar. In order to reconcile that, every 7 years and every 19 years, 7 times in 19 years, 7 years among every 19 years, there's a leap year. To reconcile the 11 and a half approximately days of deficit between the 365 solar year, 365 day solar year, and the 354 lunar year. But when we complement that, we fill in and want to compensate for a deficit, we always add more. So indeed, the extra month, and especially a month of joy, is an addition that comes from a deficit. Someone asked, did the Rebbe once compare the 60 days of Adar in a leap year to the idea of a small amount of tray falling into a pot of kosher food being bottled b'shishim? Can Rabbi Jacobson please expound on this? Thank you. So there's a concept in halacha that when kosher means you don't eat milk and meat, God forbid, but if a very small, minute amount of meat fell into a pot of milk, so generally it would make it non-kosher. But there's a concept in halacha called bittul. If it's so small, 1/60th, so there's bittul b'shishim, there's bittul b'meya, there's many levels of bittul. So the Rebbe did indeed, I think it was, I'm not sure what year it was, probably in Memches or Memtes, maybe in those years, where the Rebbe did explain bittul b'shishim as shishim, which means that even if there's some negative thing, but it's bottled in the shishim yayim, which is not just 30 days, 60 days. So the joy and the positivity and the positive energy of Adar overrides even a negative thing. That's the context, which of course is very appropriate now, that even when we have something negative, not just that it's ignored, it's bottled due to the great simcha and joy that comes out of it. Like you see, we see the positivity, the positive energy, the unity, the tzedakah, the Torah, the tefillah that has come out and that has emerged from this challenge in many ways has overridden. Not that it minimizes or diminishes, but it demonstrates the positive thing, the positive power. And we have an example for it. The Rebbe brings the example in a number of places. The concept of the haftarah. Why do we say haftarah? When we read the Parsha, why do we have to say haftarah that is usually the similar theme to that week's chapter, or if it's a certain time of the year, the theme of that time of the year. So the haftarah came about as a result of a gzeira, a negative thing. The Romans decreed that Jews shouldn't be allowed to read Torah in public. So they were not allowed to read Torah. They couldn't read it, but the Jews were smart. What does Torah mean? So they interpret it in a very narrow sense. Torah should be ksav, meaning chamisha chumshe Torah, chumoshim. But they didn't prohibit the reading of Tanakh, or Nach, I should say. So that's when they established haftarah. They found something to read that week instead of what the parsha, from the theme of the parsha. So you could think once the gzeira was over, the decree was over, okay, we're back to reading the parsha. But by Yiddishkeit and Elikus and Kedusha, there's no such thing as taking away. You added something good, you always leave it. So today we read haftarah, even though it was based on and came out of a result of a decree. But now, once we've corrected it, so now we have more Kedusha, more reading. We read the Parsha from Chumash, and then we read the associated Haftarah with it. All demonstrating how negative things end up becoming a springboard, a catalyst for so much more Kedusha. And then Yisr and Menacheshach, there's a deeper light and a deeper joy when it comes from a negative place. This month of Adar is Venapachu. Why is it so much joy? Because it was transformed. From a day of mourning and possible grief, l'simcha, miyogan l'simcha, v'napechu, chedesh asher nepech lehem, a month that was transformed, transformation from darkness to light, then the joy is so much stronger. Not just in the hergish, not just in the feeling of the gavra of the person, but the very joy itself, because it transforms a negative situation into a positive one. And we see, that joy has the power to break through all boundaries, the power of transformation. And 60 days of joy only doubles it in quantity and in quality. What can we learn from Adar about the war that began on Shemini Atzeres? So, someone wrote, it's taught that Haman made a big mistake by choosing Adar for his plot, thinking it is a bad luck day, because Moshe passed away on the 7th of Adar, but he didn't realize it's really a good luck day because it's also Moshe's birthday, correct? As the Gemara says. And that's why Higdimim, Eden, start Parshas Shkolim, Higdimim l'shkaleihem l'shkalov, the shkalov of Haman. Haman wrote through shekel. He threw a lot, and he established Shkolim. He threw lots, and then with Shkolim wanted to buy the genocide, Chmon al-Islam, of all the Jews. So we start Parshas Shkolim, we read Parshas Shkolim, the Shabbos before Adar, or so Shchedesh Adar, to precede our Shkolim as a redemption before the healing, before the cure, before the disease or the illness. Is it possible, this person writes, that the Hamas terrorists made a similar mistake by choosing October 7th because it's Vladimir Putin's birthday? And like him or not, Putin has proven to be a strong leader that doesn't take any nonsense from Muslim terrorists, as he ordered the Russian army to help annihilate ISIS. Is this perhaps a lesson that Israel and Russia should make a pact to work together to destroy the Hamas terrorists? Well, let's begin with where we should begin. Before Putin's birthday, Lahavdil, there was Shemini Atzeres and Simchas Torah in Eretz Yisrael. So I think the first thing to say is, yes, Hamas made a mistake. They thought a vulnerable day when Yidden are celebrating, just like 50 years earlier, the Arab countries chose Yom Kippur, when the Jews had their guard down. Little did they know that this is the day that celebrates the indestructibility of the Jewish people. Yom Kippur, that salachti kidvarecha, even after a tremendous chet like the terrible chet Egel. And Simchas Torah is when we celebrate the Luchas Shniyas of Matan Torah, of the second tablets of Yom Kippur. And so it's a celebration of indestructibility, that nothing can be destroyed. The Eden, Ani Hashem le'shanisi b'nei Yisrael le'chalisam. God is unchangeable, immutable, and so the Jewish people connected to Him cannot be ever destroyed, God forbid, because of their connection. And the proof is because even when something was broken, their promise, their commitment by building the golden calf, and the tablets were broken, and yet they were able to find deeper strength. Again, from the darkness came even greater light. And that's the day when the attack of October 7th was. So yes, terrible things happened that day, but ultimately it'll be the source of our victory, and even a greater victory like it's always been, that when all this fades into the past, what we'll remember is the eternity, the perpetuation of Am Yisrael. So that's what I would begin with. As far as Putin goes, his birthday, look, if you think it's a strategy, I don't know if you trust the guy, not trust the guy, he'll do things for his own agenda. So I don't want to get into whether Israel should make an alliance now with Russia. I don't know if that's exactly going to work. But the point I'm making, absolutely. And I wouldn't compare Moshe Rabbeinu to Putin Lahavdil, Moshe Rabbeinu's birthday in the month of Adar. I would compare it more, as I said, October 7th being Simchas Torah, which of course is also Moshe Rabbeinu's day. Torah Shalom, he actually calls it Simchas Torah, because the day when Moshe's Simchas Torah, when Moshe came with the Luchas and Yom Kippur, and then comes Simchas Torah, right in the beginning of Torah Shalom. That Moshe definitely said L'chaim HaSimchas Torah. That's what he says there. Okay. Let's move on. Being that this week is also Purim Katan. So Purim Katan comes, why is it called Purim Katan? Simple technical reason. Because when there's two others, you cannot put him twice. So the question of the Gemara is, when do we celebrate Purim? You'd think Purim in Adar Rishon, because Adar Sheni is the additional month. Except the Gemara says, no, mismar gula l'gula. we celebrate Purim in second month, so it should be associated to go directly from Adar into Nisan. Mismach, smichus, the connection, in an uninterrupted way, consecutively from Adar to Nisan. But to completely ignore it, we don't, God forbid. So we call it Purim Katan. And there are customs connected to that day, including that saying Tachnun and other things, but Purim Katan. But it's an interesting name, Katan. Why Katan? So I discussed this a number of years ago on this program, and I'll give you the reference in episode 104. I should also mention 249 and 392. So these are the archives that you can find at chassidusupply.com, a previous episode. So I'm not going to go through all the details. You can look it up easily there. It's an interesting letter from the Rebbe that I elaborated on. Katan is a unique name. It could have said many different ways to call it. Some actually call Purim Gadol, Katan and Gadol. You can call Purim Rishon, like we call Pesach Sheni. So there's Purim Rishon. And there are different names that are used for it, but Katan symbolizes, the Rebbe says there, the Gemara in Chulin that talks about Yaakov hu Katan, Levana is the Meir Kahana, that Eden are compared to the moon because Katan represents bittul. We talked before about the diminishment of the moon. So on one hand, it seems like a negative thing. It was diminished, smaller than the Meir Gadol. But on the other hand, the moon, Eishes Chayla Teres Baila Malchus, Lesla Megama Klum, reflects the bittul that allows it to receive from Keser, Chassidus explains, from the highest levels. So Yaakov hu Katan, David hu Katan, the Gemara elaborates on the concept of Katnus as bittul that allows us to experience something far greater. Like we say, Nafshi ka'ofer la'koel tiyeh, psachli b'b'seiresecha. That when we suspend ourselves, we allow ourselves to receive something far greater. So Katan represents a level of bittul. So Purim, obviously, with all the halachas, we celebrate in the second Adar, Mismagul Legula. But Purim Katan reminds us of the inyan of Katan. It also has association with children. We know Purim B'chlal is connected to children. And indeed, Purim Katan, the Rebbe a number of times spoke to the children and also cited the Maimon, the famous Maimon of Kibla Yehudim that was said Purim Katan in Tofresh Pei Zayin, 1927, in Moscow. And it was very dangerous times, and the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke strongly about that the way to address the Gzeres, the decrees against the Jewish people, is to do what Mordechai did, gathering the young Jewish children, the Ketanim and the Ketanis, the young children. Because Katan has the quality that is able to reach far deeper levels, as we discussed. So the lesson from Purim Katan is a very straightforward lesson in that sense. And more elaboration as I referred to the previous episodes where I discussed this. Okay. This week is also Parshas Tetzaveh. Now we know Parshas Tetzaveh is after Moshe's birth. It's the only Parsha that doesn't mention Moshe's name. And the Sfarim talk about it because it's the week that usually associates with the month, with the birthday, the time when the birthday of Moshe. But also his yahrzeit. Since he passed away, so you don't mention his name. Also symbolizes the Mechenin Amasifracha, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was on the mountain praying for the Eden after the Chet Egel, and ultimately gaining forgiveness with the second tablets and then the celebration on Simchas Torah, Shemini Atzeres Simchas Torah, he said, Mechenin Amasifracha, erase my name from the Sefer. So as a zecher to it, the Sfarim say, there's a parsha that doesn't mention his name. Here too you see a Katan, an element of bittul. You don't see Moshe's name. And yet it says, Va'ata Tetzaveh. The atzmis of Moshe. Etzem, the leisam is lebeshumez v'lebeshum kates, as we say about the Eberster and Sadikim Dem Lebedim. So the Rebbe elaborates that in this parsha we find not the Gilui of Moshe as his name, but the etzem of Moshe. That's higher than a name. So on one hand, you'd think, one second, the name is not there for a negative reason. No, you find a deeper connection. Because in Katan you find greater, like it says, the Frierdiker Rebbe brings from the Baal Shem Tov, that the pshittus of a ish poshet, the simplicity of a simple person, the simplicity of a child, it brings down, pshit is connected to pshittus atzmus. simplicity that's higher than all the Giluyim. So lower than Giluyim, rooted in higher than Giluyim. Because when you have a tziyur, you have a structure, and you have a beautiful ornaments and all the different fanfare, so you can experience the divine expression. But if you want the divine essence, it's when you suspend it all. Silence. Like the second luchas. In silence, we gain and we experience something far higher, the etzem. So all this is hinted to in Purim Katan and this time of the year in Parshas Tetzaveh. In Parshas Tetzaveh itself, it begins right away with the Shem and Zayzach, with the mitzvah of lighting the menorah, which we've talked about in the past. There are two kosses lamoyer, as the Rebbe in the famous Sikha Maimer of Tavshin Mem Aleph, Parshas Tetzaveh, Tavshin Mem Aleph, which was the last Maimer the Rebbe actually edited and handed out. The last Maimer the Rebbe handed out, I should say, in Tavshin Nun Beis. So he talks about kosses lamoyer, also an element of bittul. Kosses lamoyer means it's crushed. The olives are crushed to produce oil. So that crushing brings out the moyer, the etzem, the ata. But later in the chapter, we talk also about the big day kohanim. So the main mishkan, the main structure of the temple, and its containers, its kelim, its vessels, the Aron, the menorah, the shulchan are talked about, and also the structure are talked about in Parshas Terumah. In Parshas Tetzaveh, as the Rebbe explains in a number of places, you talk about the deeper elements in the Mishkan, the va'ata, the atzmius, Shem Lamoyer, and also big day kohuna, the kovedil teferes, the garments of the kohanim. So even though the main avodah of the kohanim was their service, whether it's lighting the menorah, or bringing their offerings, or the keteiros, and other things they did, the shulchan. But they had to wear begadim. Begadim you'd think is secondary, no, but that's why in Parshas Tetzaveh we learn what? L'kovedil teferes. So a question was asked, what lessons do we learn from the uniforms the kohanim wore while serving in the temple? Does dressing a certain way make the atmosphere more conducive to being in harmony with spiritual energy? And the answer is absolutely yes. But it's l'kovedil teferes. In other words, it's adding an element. It's like when we say dira no, a beautiful home, marchiva daitel shalodam, expands the mind of a person. The Rebbe's famous sikha about Chav Beis Shvat, Chaya Mushka, her name, the Rebbe's name, that she had a vitality, and Mushka, a beautiful aroma. So you could have the basics of a home, but it's not a beautiful home. The Kotel Teferes adds, they didn't just serve in the temple, they served with a beauty. Everything was done, as the Rambam paskins, to the utmost. In Kedusha, you don't just do the minimum. There was Kain and Hevel. Hevel brought an offering that was of quality, not just the minimal offering. So you always do the best. So the Kotel Teferes represents the beauty. And indeed, you see the fact. A beautiful home expands the mind. That's why you find Zek Keli Van Veyu. Make sure the mezuzah is a mezuzah, no, a beautiful mezuzah, a beautiful Sefer Torah, beautiful Svarim. So even though it's only external, but we're talking about internal, for sure it's beautiful. But the internal also should express itself in a beautiful outside. So when it says, the Rebbe says, Sheker Achem ve'hevla yefi, kim yishi yiras Hashem hitisalel, as the Rebbe explains, means if it's only chen and yefi on its own, it's empty, hollow. But if there's a beauty within, there's the ishi yiras Hashem hitisalel. Then we also have the concept of the imaz, the matriarchs, what Yifas Teyar, Yifas Mara. We talk about their beauty, not just the internal beauty, also external beauty. Because the internal and the external, Teiche Kebari, is seamless. As a matter of fact, in Hebrew you have the word ponim, face. The word for face, which means in English the face of it, the surface of it, in Hebrew is also panimius. It's also the inner. The inner and the outer are all seamlessly one. In English you say the surface, the outer is more superficial. The panim. The ponim, the outside. But it's not necessarily panimius. But in Hebrew, ponim and panimius go hand in hand. So when they served in that way, l'kovel teferes, you have this Gemara in Zvochim, Afid Zayin, where he was riding on, where the future emperor of Rome was riding on a horse, and he saw Id, and he saw his gartel fallen down, I think it was. And he got off the horse and went over to him and said, "Your mamlechas kain and v'gei kodesh. Ha'id is mamlechas kain and v'gei kodesh. The gadol should be positioned in the right place for the ultimate respect, for the ultimate beauty." So there's a lot to be said about external that is external, but the external reflects, obviously, the inner. Not just the external without the internal. Okay. Since we're already on the Parshas, there's a few questions I just want to deal with the last few Parshas that are also connected. Obviously, Tetzaveh it follows Parshas Terumah. So in Terumah, we spoke already about the Mishkan and its role and its Chiddush, the contribution that the Mishkan, the temple, had. So one of the questions asked that we are following up on is the issue of Parshas Terumah. Someone asked, what were the cherubim, the cherubim, the cherubs, the cherubim on the ark, and what do they represent? So the ark, of course, the Adar Kodesh had on top of it the Shnei cherubim. Cherubim, there's different explanations what they look like, but the Pshutish HaMikra in place is kruv echad, or they were in the face of children, a little boy and a little girl. So it represents the yichud of Kusha B'richa and Shchinta, but not just, but in the form of cotton, Zoyer Ampin, small face. So children represent Pshitis, we spoke about simplicity. The male and female represent Zocher Nekeva, Bara Esam, God created male and female, Mashpir Makabel, and together, when they faced each other, we know that's when the Kedusha, that's when there was the Esam, the Tzene Shalmokim, that we were, God felt close to us. So the Keruvim represented the connection, because what happened by the Adon, and the Kaperis and Beishnei Bad the Adon, that's when Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's from where Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu. So essentially it's an interface between heaven and earth. An interface between Mashpia and Makabel, between Zah and Malchus, in the language of Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe writes. So it expresses itself in the physical face of children. Kruvim. There's other explanations, there's beautiful sikhs from the Rebbe and Likutei Sikhs on this, you could look it up through the index. But that's briefly, so when we say that the Mishkan was a place, Hashem said, this is the place I will meet with you. So the Kruvim capture that type of meaning, two faces looking at each other. Even when the temple was destroyed, God forbid, it says the Kruvim were facing one another. When the Babylonians entered, you'd think, no, that was a time of Churban. But the deepest connection is sometimes experienced, because Hashem took out his wrath, al eitzim al avonim, on the building, but not on the Eden. So the deepest love is sometimes dafka in a time of distance. Again, from the darkness comes deeper light. That's why it's a mitzvah. When husband and wife separate, meaning the husband's going off, halach ma'il medina sayam, that they be intimate with each other. The Eibishter, before the long Golus, the Kruvim were facing one another, a symbol of that intimacy and that intimate connection. I will be with you under all circumstances. Even though in Giluyim, the Baal, in this case the Eibishter, the Shechina is going to be Begalusa, as the Eden would be in Golus, but the connection remains even deeper, because that's when you see it most in times of distance. In times of darkness, you see how close people are. That despite the darkness, they still remain close, and even closer than ever before. Okay. And finally, two thoughts from Parshas Mishpatim. And so someone asked the question, the Torah mentions 4 guardians. Yeah, the Shemer Chinam, the Shemer Sachir, the Secher, and the Leve, the Shoyal. So someone who watches, so the Shemer Chinam is someone who is hired to be a guardian, but for free, a volunteer. Shemer Sachir is someone who's hired by pay. A Secher is someone who rents it, pays rent for something that he has benefit from. And a Shoyal is someone who borrows something for no fee, free. Someone who watches for a paid fee, someone who watches for free as a favor, someone who rents, and someone who borrows. Since Hashem entrusted us to take care of the world for him, which of the 4 guardians are we? So there's a beautiful sikha exactly about this from the Rebbe, based on Ashalah, And he says the truth is that this is a choice we make. It's 4 ways that we serve God in this world. 4 attitudes, you can say. And we'll go from one extreme to the next. The Shem Chinam knows my whole life is God's. I'm here only to serve God. So he's not getting paid. He's not having any benefit. He's here to protect and guard over God's world. So God protects over him, and that's why his responsibilities are a lot less than the others. Hashem is someone who's being paid. So he also knows that his job is to be a guardian, but he's also benefiting from it. Life is also some benefit for him. He's getting paid for it. So his responsibilities are greater. God says, I'll protect you as well, but you have some responsibilities. This doesn't mean the Shem Echirim doesn't have responsibilities. On the contrary, he's assumed all the responsibilities on himself. But we're talking about when there's a liability and something happens, God protects him more, meaning he's not as liable. Then comes Seicher, the person Seicher that rents. So here, it's already about him. He's renting it. He's not here to protect someone else's property or object. It's for him, and he's ready to pay for it. Which means he understands that it's not his and he needs to pay. So now there's more self involved and less bittul telekus. So his responsibilities are greater. Liabilities are greater. And then comes the fourth. The fourth is completely a person who's like basically eating off the fat of the land. The world belongs to me. Yes, God created it. And I'm borrowing. I'm not paying for it. Basically, the one who's giving the least and taking the most. The Shem Echinim, on the other hand, is the opposite. His whole life is to be a guardian of God's world. And he doesn't get anything for it. Here he's getting everything. He is watching over it because he's responsible, and that's why his liabilities are the greatest. So it comes down to we have choices of how we're going to have our attitude and how much the self is involved and how much bittul there is in our Aveda. That's briefly what the Rebbe says in a powerful sikha which you can be found in Likutei Sichos. To remember where, I don't recall right now, but it's something you can look up easily if you do a search. Okay. Another question was asked in Parshas Mishpatim: is it significant that at the same time the U.S. Congress voted against a bill sending more money and aid to help Israel? In the Parsha we read that Hashem promised to send special bees, the tzira, to sting our enemies in the eyes to protect us. What are these special bees, and should we be wearing goggles and eye protection so we don't accidentally get stung? Okay, I don't know about the goggle part, but we'll say this. Hashem yilachem lechem. We're fighting a battle. We have to fight b'derech HaTikvah with everything we have. But we know we go also with God's powers and strengths. And there's no question that God will be with us and protect us. And yes, sting the enemy in their eyes. You can interpret it many, many ways. Physically, psychologically, emotionally. Confuse them. Shouldn't be able to see clearly. I mean, there's many ways to interpret it. So I'm not going to over interpret and say that what happened exactly in Congress. That I'll leave for people who have more, I guess, prescient visions. But there's no question that we read in the Parsha about enemies and battles, and we learn from it how Hashem helps and protects us. We need to do what we have to do, and Hashem in turn will do what He has to do. Okay. Next question. What can we learn from Argentinian President Javier Milei's prayers at the Kotel? The president of Argentina, Javier Milei, went to Israel to pray for the release of the hostages, and miraculously the next day, the Israeli special forces located and safely rescued 2 Argentinian Israeli hostages in Gaza. Can Rabbi Jacobson please explain Javier Milei? Can Rabbi Jacobson please ask Javier Milei to pray for my bank account? Okay, but seriously, what is it about the way Javier Milei prayed by the Kotel that merited an answer in less than 24 hours? That we can emulate so we can also get fast, positive responses from Hashem for our needs. I don't even think Javier Milei is Jewish. So if we can copy his prayer and his kavanah, we could probably get an answer in less than an hour. Well, being somewhat involved with a personal connection, I will say this. It's sincerity. Real, pure, unadulterated sincerity. Without any airs about it, without any preparations, just a natural love for God. The words that he told me, to hug the Kotel, that's what he said. I want to hug the Kotel. We don't know how Hashem responds to things, but one thing is for sure. When you come with Rachmana liba boy, God wants our hearts, our sincerity, our pure hearts. That is the simplest and most direct way to pierce the heavens themselves. The Hashgacha pratis of this is quite extraordinary, that Purim come to Israel. And that very day, I don't know if you know this, but that very day he visited the families of the Argentinian hostages. I think there were 13 total, 2 already released earlier. There were 11 remaining and 2 they freed. Literally that day, Thursday at late afternoon, in Herzliya, where the embassy, the Argentinian embassy is till now. I think it's being moved to Jerusalem. So he went to visit the families, and literally the next day, and then that night he went to the Kotel praying, and the next day they were freed, yeah. So we can learn many things, the Hashgacha of it, the Kiddush Hashem of it, many, many lessons, which we'll discuss, I'm sure, as time passes. But here, regarding our situation, sincerity. He's not Jewish, and it doesn't matter. Hashem listens to all prayers. Beisi zu beis tefillah kol ha'amim. Beisi, the Beis HaMikdash is a house of prayer for all nations, including the wall. And indeed, may all our prayers be fulfilled quickly, expeditiously, and with the least amount of pain. Okay. Another follow-up, before we continue on, let's do a follow-up. Dear Rebbe Jacobson, this is about Meir Kahana. So how is the Rebbe's view different than Meir Kahana? So I spoke about this in previous programs. So someone writes the following. Dear Rebbe Jacobson, I listened carefully to your response to the question of why the Rebbe didn't adopt Rabbi Kahana's view based on the verse in Numbers 33:55. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those whom you leave over will be as spikes in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they will harass you in the land in which you settle. Yeah, in the Sefer Bamidbar. In truth, I couldn't make heads or tails of what your response was. Was it that the Rebbe wasn't willing to pressure the government to change their policy regarding the non-Jewish inhabitants? Certainly he was willing to push for Mi Yehudi. Why wasn't he willing to push in this matter? Certainly the Rebbe's approach wasn't to rely on experts. And since we have such a clear verse forewarning us of the misery that will unfold if we leave the Arabs in the land, why wasn't the Rebbe's approach very clear about removing them from our land? We clearly see the devastation wrought by keeping them in the land, which continues even now as terror attacks continue after October 7th, and not just from Gaza. Why would the Rebbe be off the record about this matter? Also, clearly this situation is very different than immigrants who come to the USA and cause criminal mischief or worse. The Arabs in Israel believe that with time they will kick us out of the land and, God forbid, make the Holocaust look like children's play. God forbid. Well, I'll elaborate a bit more to what I've said. I thought it was clear, but I accept if it wasn't clear, it's not clear. The Rebbe was not a politician. The Rebbe was a ish teira, a ish emes, ish alikim. Moshe Rabbeinu of a generation. Not coming to dictate policy in the sense of what exactly you should do, not do. The Rebbe brought the teira perspective. Eretz Yisrael is a holy land. Siman Shin Chavtes tells us the laws when you're dealing with an enemy who's declared war against you. You have to always be alert and not give up 1 inch of territory that can be pekuach nefesh, unfortunately, can lead to a matter of life and death. The Rebbe didn't go into a policy. Meir Kahana, I don't know if he was a politician for sure. I don't even put them in the same category. It's just that the question was asked to me. So what the Rebbe held? The Rebbe felt that you have to come strong. The Rebbe, God forbid, said many times that when you're strong, there'll be no war. And therefore, there will be no lives lost. Not Jewish lives and not Arab lives, not Muslim lives. But you have to come with strength. You can't come with weakness. You can't behave like a loser. And the winner dictates the terms. That was the Rebbe's position. What the terms should be, that the Rebbe encouraged them to figure it out. But if you come from strength, you'll figure it out, because either the Arabs won't want to live there because you're standing strong and you're not compromising to them. But if you start giving them, like a slow bleeding, here's another piece of land, here's this promise, that promise, that can only backfire. What to do instead? Once you're strong. I remember I was in Israel in 1971 in Tov Shalom at Aleph. So a few years after the 6-Day War. You can go anywhere. I was not told. I was 14 years old. Nobody ever told me. I went on Arab buses and Arab taxis. I went to Hebron. I went to the Shar Shechem. I went to places that today by day you can't walk. I went by night. It was the same people. They still hated Jews, but they knew they lost the war, as the Rebbe said in a number of sikhs. It's a gezittert fara soldat. They trembled before an Israeli soldier. And then, unfortunately, they were given strength. They were given power. They were told, no, here, this belongs to you. Right after the 6-Day War, I don't want to speak negatively now. It's not a good time for that. But just to make the point, they were ready to give the keys back to the Mufti on the Temple Mount after they won the war, the Israelis did. That attitude can never work. What to do once you're strong? So maybe many Muslims or Arabs would move away because they don't want to be in a country like that. But once you give them, make them feel, think of what happened after World War II. If you think the Germans and then I start feeling, you know what? I didn't really lose. What do you think would happen? And look what happened. Look what's happening now. So the Rebbe spoke the emes apit Torah. What to do after that? That everybody has to figure out. Off the record, maybe, behind the scenes, the Rebbe may have suggested ideas. So I don't want to compare it, but Kahana was a politician. I'm not saying necessarily in a negative way. He had strong positions, and he had his ideas. He's entitled to state his ideas. I can't say whether the Rebbe disagreed. Maybe that was something the Rebbe deferred to, let them figure it out. Let the experts figure it out. But what the Rebbe knew what you needed experts was the issue of pekuach nefesh. Not to give up land, not 1 inch of land. You ask a doctor, you ask the soldier, you ask the military, you don't ask politicians. Don't turn it into politics. It's life and death. That's the main focus here. So I think it's completely two different types of people, different roles. The Rebbe is a Rebbe, and Kahana was Kahana, as there were other opinions in Israel what to do. Strong opinions, weaker opinions. You could agree, disagree. I think the Rebbe weighed in on the primary things that were most important to establish. Be strong, don't compromise when it comes to pekuach nefesh, and everything will fall into place. You don't have to be apologetic and let the enemy think that they're equal to you, because that always creates problems. Okay. So I want to continue part 2 of a question that came up in last week's program, which was, what should be our attitude to Zionism and to displaying the Israeli flag and singing HaTikvah? So what I addressed in the last program was primarily the different views on modern secular Zionism. I'm using the word secular very loosely, but basically the modern Zionistic movement, the World Zionist Congress, and that led from Theodor Herzl and the Zionists, that led to the Balfour Declaration, the League of Nations, and ultimately to the founding of the State of Israel, with the UN ratifying that in 1948. And the different views from one extreme to the next. Didn't go through every opinion, but generally we covered that to understand the theology behind it all. So there's a few questions, obviously, in that itself that we didn't finish, and some more practical questions today. One of the things that we addressed there was is there a difference between before 1948 and after 1948? So the theological opposition was basically that a godless Israel is not what's supposed to be. Now, no one questions here, let's make this clear. The holiness of the land, Eretz HaKodesh, the promised land, that's throughout history. That cannot change. There's laws of Trumas and Maisis and Shemitah. Makes no difference whether 1948 or 1848 or 48 or the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Obviously, the difference is the time of Beis Hamikdash, mitzad halachas. But the Kedusha Sa'aretz does not change. Kedusha Le'ezazim Imkeim, it remains holy. That's not what we're discussing. We're also not discussing the idea that Jews always gravitated to Eretz Yisrael, not just davening toward it. But we see individuals, big daily Yisrael, the Shalah, the Ramban, many who ended up in Eretz Yisrael, many wanted to go, didn't end up going. So that's also not a question about living in Eretz Yisrael or wanting to be buried there or wanting to live there the rest part of your life. There's questions about the mitzvah of Aliyah Eretz Yisrael and Zman HaGolus. The issue here is establishing a state, establishing a memshala, a sovereign state under Jewish rule. And there were many opinions. Let's go from one extreme, the opinion that remains, unfortunately, by some, that still maintain it in the most grotesque and I would say obscene manner, where they actually march with the enemy, that the establishment of a state under Jewish rule is forbidden. Based on the 3 oaths that the Jewish people received from God, there were 3 Gimel Shvuos. Well, actually, one of them was for the Goyim, that they should not oppress the Jews more than, it should be moderate, their oppression. But the other 2 is that the Jews should not force themselves le'sala b'chema, and they should not offend the non-Jewish nations. So there's big debates about that in general, whether these shavuos are applicable today. Some say it's agoda and never was halach in the first place. Meaning it's not a law, it's an agoda. It's a story. It doesn't mean it doesn't have merit, but it's not halach. Others say those oaths are no longer applicable because the goyim they transgress their oath. Others say once the goyim agreed, then it's not applicable. I'm not going to go through every opinion. You can look this up and find all the different approaches. What I will say is this, from the Rebbe's approach, or Chabad approach, if you wish. So the Rebbe Rashab was adamantly against the establishment of the state before the fact. And of course the Rebbe would have been the same thing. The Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, this is all one approach. And the reason, as I said, is much more than just the matter of the Shavuos. Because there you could say, maybe it's not a halacha. But the idea of establishing a state as if it has sacred value, absolutely not. So as long as they opposed it because it would not be a Torah state. And a Torah state is only possible when Mashiach comes. And ultimately, without that type of Ge'en Yankiv and Tekiv that comes from Torah and mitzvahs, which is really this foundation of Eretz Yisrael in the first place, there'd be many problems. But that again, you can discuss one way or the other. But then once it happened, meaning there was an establishment, so it's not even relevant here if there was the right thing that it should happen or not. Let's say it's not. But Poel Mamish, it happens. And now you have thousands, if not millions of Jews. Today it's became Yirbu, over 8 million Jews that need governance, that need utilities, that need protection, that need a military. So why is it different than any community council, so to speak? Any group coming together to protect the Jewish interests in that area. Why is that just so less than that? And even then, even the biggest adamant, vehement so-called state of Israel did not stop from visiting or living in Eretz Yisrael. Because as I said, that's not what we're discussing here. So the approach would be, you don't have to give Memshalas Yisrael, you have to give the state of Israel Torah value. But value as a respected entity that's protecting the interests of the people, by all means. And trying to influence that government and trying to influence the country to follow as much as possible Torah law, absolutely. That's why when the Rebbe invoked Siman Shin Chavtes, he said very clearly, we're not talking about Kedusha Sa'aretz. We're talking here simply the laws that apply even in Hardah, even outside of Eretz Yisrael, even in France, in England, the United States, anywhere in the world. The same laws. The Rebbe actually invoked the same Shin Chavtes in Crown Heights, that you can't just leave a community where there are Jews living because you put others in danger. In other words, there's laws when you're dealing with a dangerous situation with enemies around you, no matter where you are. It only adds the Eretz Yisrael element to it. But that's some concept. And of course influence the government to honor those laws. because they make sense. You're dealing with an enemy. Look, we have a sworn enemy, and when the guard was let down, look what happened here, unfortunately. So it's simply basic common sense based on halacha. So that is not about giving this 1948 something spiritual happened. There are those that feel something did happen, and they call it the beginning of Geula. That the Rebbe was adamantly opposed to. But to say that it has no value, therefore you have to pay taxes, participate in the military, you participate with all the activities. That doesn't mean, however, you have to call it a Mashiach Dika Beis David type of rule. When Mashiach comes, Yamad Ishma Beis David from the house of David, who will continue the dynasty of kingship over Eretz Yisrael. That's a Torah thing. That will come when Mashiach comes. And that we don't have control over. Not with our will did we go into Golos, not with our will did we go out. That's up to Hashem. We can't force Hashem's hand. But that doesn't mean that in living, whether it's small amount or large amount, which by the way is another explanation. Some say that the oath was only about going Salah B'Chema as a very large group, but not slowly is how it happened in Eretz Yisrael. That too can be debated one way or the other, but the point here is we don't even have to go there. Because the value that we're giving to Eretz Yisrael is the importance of it, its role to protect Eden, and to be a place that the more they're protected, the more, when Mashiach does come, you have already the ground laid for a peaceful country, a strong country, and Mashiach will take over from there. So that's just a little more context in the opinions. Now, with that said, someone asked the question, how do we respond to the question whether we are Zionists? Very good. Let's address that. Jews that support Israel are called Zionists. But what does the word Zion mean? Is it the name of a region in Israel, or does it have another meaning? So, let's make this very clear. No matter what the Zionist Congress was called, no matter what they call themselves as Zionists, the word Zion and Zion precedes long before the 19th century and long before the 18th century. It goes all the way back to Torah. Zion. Zion b'mishpat tipodeh v'shaveh b'tzedakah. Right, in the beginning of Yeshaya, we say it in Shabbos Chazein Haftarah, Zion will be redeemed, b'tzedakah. B'mishpat with Torah, it will be redeemed with law. It's not b'mishpat tipodeh v'shaveh v'tzedakah, and its inhabitants through charity. Sechzen einenu b'tzion. You find in Shemini Atzeres, Shuvcha b'tzion, the idea of returning to Tzion. And the word Tzion means a sign. It's a sign of Hashem. So this is a Teirah concept. So of course we're all Zionists in that sense. The true Zionists, the Zionists connected to Tzion, that the whole Eretz Yisrael is a Tzion, is a marker to represent, to be the bridge, Shara Shamayim, between heaven and earth, a holy land. A land where it's today as well. God protects it from the beginning to the end of the year, all year round. So that sense, of course, we're Zionists. We're the real Zionists. There's a very powerful letter that Rebbe writes to President Shazar. Shazar, Shnei Zalman Rubinov. He was named after the Alter Rebbe. He came from a family of Chassidim that rooted from the Chabad Chassidim. He was close with the Rebbe. He came to the Rebbe several times as president, before being president, afterwards. So the Rebbe wrote him a letter once where he addressed him as being the president of Eretz Yisrael. So he writes back to the Rebbe, so to speak, with a complaint. He says, why are you causing me the discomfort of having to choose to be a chassid or to be a president? Why? You're calling me president of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. My oath that I took, my oath for office, was president of Medinas Yisrael, the state of Israel. And now, since you're writing to me that, I have to choose now. Am I fulfilling my oath to the state of Israel or to the land of Israel, as you're calling it? So why are you forcing me whether I should be a chassid or be a president, essentially? So the Rebbe writes back to him, number one, you're a chassid long before I was born. How could I control whether you're a chassid or not? And number two, on the contrary, State of Israel is 1948. Eretz Yisrael goes back thousands of years. You're a president of a country that's here thousands of years. Think about that. If we attribute the connection of the Jewish people to the state of Israel in 1948, someone can come and say, and look at the UN, God forbid, I don't even want to mention it, but let's say the UN decides to vote and say, you know what, we're taking Israel back from the Jewish people. Whatever we gave them in 1948 is gone. England will say the Balfour Declaration is no longer valid. But we're not dependent on you. Eretz Yisrael was given to us by Hashem. For the Rashi in the first Pasuk in Chumash. And that's critical to understand here. So, say Zionists, you want to know, we're Zionists that began long before 1898, or 1890, or 1870, or whatever it may be. Go back all the way to the true Zionists. And what does it mean? Seeing that it's Yisrael, our ways, our channel. That it's a triangle, a triad between the Jewish people and the Jewish land and the Jewish Torah. Shleimus ha'am and Shleimus ha'aretz and Shleimus ha'Torah all go hand in hand. They need each other. And we daven 3 times a day toward Eretz Yisrael. It's the center of our lives. And we never forget Yerushalayim in every situation. Im eshkachech Yerushalayim. And so on. And how many times do we mention our prayers? On and on. L'shana bo b'Yerushalayim. We never forgot Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, and we will be redeemed, and we will have Mashiach, and we will return, all of us there. The fact there's so many Jews, B'ashgacha Prat, is beautiful. So we have to do everything to support the country on a very basic level, because of the services that it provides, and you need a secure and safe country, and let it thrive and be matzliach, and also prepare the people for the coming of Mashiach, when ultimately Eretz Yisrael will be under the Memshala of Beis David, Melech me Beis David. So another question, following up this topic. So based on that, so then what is the response to the issue of, well, let me just read this. Why should we support the government of Israel if the Rebbe Rashab is very strongly anti-Zionist? So I think I explained the answer to that. We support the government of Israel, and the Rebbe Rashab would have supported it as well. We're supporting them, as I said, the services that they provide. It's a major Jewish community council, if you wish. I don't mean to dismiss it, but it has all those values, and of course you support that. And when he was anti-Zionist, he was anti the godlessness. And he would still be anti. But anti doesn't mean that you fight the fact that you have a state, you have a people, you're running, as I say, services, a military. You can't be opposed to that. There's people in danger if you oppose that, God forbid. So for sure he supports that. And he supports that. Let's bring God into the picture. Let's teach both people in the government, outside the government, the Jewish, the Israeli people should understand that Torah, Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael go hand in hand. So then now the question is, which I'll conclude with and continue, I see part 3 next week. So what should be our attitude to the Israeli flag and to HaTikvah, the Israeli anthem? So based on what I said, you understand these are symbols of the godlessness of Israel. They very adamantly did not put the name God into it. Tzur Yisrael, in HaTikvah, you don't have the name of God. So it's not just another anthem. Who cares? You sing a song, you sing this song, that song. It's symbolic. And same thing with the flag. So what we're opposed, if anyone is opposed, is not to the country of Israel, and it's not to the government of Israel, and it's not to the people of Israel. Some symbols that represent that godlessness. However, this has to be done with discretion. This is not an opposition to the Jewish people that unite. Someone will say, 1 second, there are young men fighting on the front lines and dying with a flag in their hands and singing HaTikvah. That's why you have to also take this with a certain balance and have some common sense. There's no Yarek Val Yaver that says if someone sings HaTikvah or uses a flag, you have to be Meiser Nefesh like Gilei Arayah, Shvichas Dom and Avodah Zarah. That's not the case. It's symbolic. So in the situation, you try, you prefer, and that's why you'll find some will say, you know what, that's not what I see as symbolic. We want to know what I represent Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael, my support for Eretz Yisrael. I cry for Eretz Yisrael. I will do everything possible to defend Eretz Yisrael. I don't necessarily have to buy into every symbol. But to go fight against it, especially in a time of war, you have to be prudent. So here's what I would say. If you're running a Chabad house, so being that you're representing the Rebbe, if the Rebbe wouldn't want the flag or would not have the niggin, again, it's not against anything, it's just the symbolism of it. So it's best, obviously, you can't do that, but independent of your opinion. On the other hand, if parents come in and say, I want to sing HaTikvah with my children in the morning in school, so you could either go to war with them, or maybe you can explain to them. If you can, great. But if you can't, I would just say very practically, simply a common sense thing. You look the other way, let them do what they want to do. It's not your policy. You're not coming out against it. You're not coming out for it. And whatever happens, happens. It's like people do a lot of things. People sitting around a table, they're singing a niggin. And the women begin to sing. You can start yelling at them and stop singing. You can maybe nicely suggest. Or if they sing, you just look the other way. Not everything has to become a war. And especially in sensitive times like this, when there's a war being fought. So communities come together, and there's a rally or an event. Should you not go to an event because there may be an Israeli flag or they may sing HaTikvah? Absolutely not. Your going does not say anything. Should you endorse the event by signing your name as a Chabad organization? You don't have to sign your name. Let it be a community event and you're participating. In other words, you have to have the fifth Shulchan Aruch, common sense it's called. That's critical in all matters, especially when it comes to things like this, especially in a time like this. So I hope I was able to explain the nuance difference. And I want to say again, this is not coming out of war against the Israeli flag or coming a war against HaTikvah. You want to talk what they represent? That's the symbols they represent. It was of a secular state as opposed to a Torah state, which is meant to happen when Mashiach comes. But again, it's not in the category of three things you have to fight for to the death. And that's the key thing to distinguish between the two. A lot more to be said about all of this. And I want to answer some more questions, but time is limited. So let me just conclude with this. At the end of the day, there's a very big difference between things before they happen and after they happen. Just like we talk about tshuva. A person is not allowed to sin and then say, I'm going to do tshuva. That's not acceptable. And obviously, one should never transgress. And yet we still say that once someone transgressed, there's the concept of tshuva. And not only that, you can elevate it and transform it even higher than a Baal Tshuva. They can't even stand in a place like that. So how do you explain it? Before and after. Even Echtev Oshav, the Alter Rebbe says twice in Tanya, Im Dochak v'nichnes, even that, you can even do tshuva on that transgression, that you use tshuva, in Katega Nasa Senega, that you use tshuva, that too you can correct. But that takes a special extra tshuva. So before the fact is one thing. After the fact, you have to look at the situation, what we have, and see what you can do to redeem it and correct it as best way possible. I think it's a vital, vital point in this whole picture. That still doesn't mean you change your position, your theological position. The theological position is that Mashiach, like the Rambam Paskins, Mashiach Mebeis David will rise and he will influence, he'll be Huga b'Torah Mitzvahs, he'll be dedicated to Torah Mitzvahs, and he will influence others, and will fight battle, Yilchem Mechamas Hashem. That's Cheskas Mashiach, presumed to be Mashiach. V'yim Atzeres, and if he wins the battle, and he rebuilds the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi B'Mkeimei, the third temple in its place, and Kabetz Nitzchei Yisrael, and gathers all the Jews to Eretz Yisrael, then you know Hashem has chosen his Mashiach Vadai. He's certainly Mashiach, and Ozeh Pechalamim, and all the nations of the world are transformed. Then that we call the ultimate Zion, ultimate Zion, the ultimate Yerushalayim Abnuya, where Yerushalayim will be rebuilt with the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi. Now the fact that Yerushalayim is right now a beautiful city and many people living there, and there's a kotel and so on, yeah, but it's still a kotel. It's not Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi. So it's only going to add a whole new dimension. And then Eretz Yisrael will be ruled by Beis David. It's a whole different reality. We don't want to compare what's now with Beis David. That's not a crazy concept. That's why the Rebbe wrote to President Ben Tzvi of Israel. He didn't call him Hanossi. He said, why? Because Nossi, I reserved, the Rebbe says, from my youngest childhood, I used to imagine what Mashiach would be like. Nossi is Mashiach. So it's not in any way to denigrate or to limit your authority. Just the word Nossi, Mashiach. That's a Nossi, when you know what you're looking for. The Rebbe even said in his own work, Lehevel Larik. Even though the Rebbe did such gdelas and neflois. Because relative to what Mashiach is, even Kol HaTeira, this world, including Matan Teira and Tanoim, Amaroim, and everything, is Hevel hu legabe Teiroso shel Mashiach. Hevel. Like hollow, like empty, compared to, because if you know what Mashiach is like, if you know what sin really is like, it's a whole different world. So why would I suffice and accept a certain symbol or technical things that are not what it's meant to be? It's compromising my standard. But I still support whatever is there, as I said before. That's the way we have to look at it. And we have to always be positive. Let's teach people what Zion really is. Let's teach people what Eretz Yisrael really is, what the Eden are, what Yerushalayim is, Yerushalayim, complete awe, complete reverence of God. What Eretz Yisrael, Sarisei Melekim Vanoshim Vatuchal, Li Reish, and all the interpretation of what Eretz Yisrael is. So instead of being no, we're just for more. We want a far bigger Eretz Yisrael, a far greater Eretz Yisrael that goes back thousands of years, not just something that is here for a few years and not subject to other people's opinions. It's that God that gave us this land. So with that attitude, we have also the Ge'en Yankiv and the positive. That's what we should be teaching people, the positive. I wouldn't get into a debate why we don't do this. I explained it here because we need to understand its meaning. But that was the real opposite. That Rebbe Rashab was not a kanoi against Eretz Yisrael. He was a kanoi for Mashiach and Geula, and he knew what the standard was. He saw the real light. So everything compared to that by him was not as inadequate, may even been a desecration. So may we be zeicha by speaking about it, finally be zeicha to the, first of all, the end of this whole darkness, Geula mitis v'ashlema and Eretz Yisrael, and the Binyan Beis HaMikdash Ashlishi with Mashiach Tzidkenu. This has been My Life Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. ChassidusApplied.com. Thank you so much.
This program is brought to you by My Life, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at ChassidusApplied.com/donate.